Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We are so excited to be joining you today at Cardiff in Wales. We are currently at Cardiff University preparing for tonight's debate between the University of Central Missouri and Cardiff University. It is going to be a really fun evening. Tonight, the resolution is, this House believes the UK should prioritize the special relationship with the US. Now, that might sound a little bit unique. Jack, do you want to give us just a little bit of historical context so we understand what this special relationship is?
Yeah, it refers, Winston Churchill, Sir Winston Churchill, when he was Prime Minister, first started using the phrase in 1944 and then formalized it in a speech before Parliament in 1946. And what it refers to is, as allies in World War I and World War II, we have a very unique, special relationship because of our culture, because of our military alliances, because of our economic situation, because of our diplomatic situation. And so it's kind of this brotherhood or kinship, and you know, the resolution basically centers around whether or not the UK should continue to prioritize that after Brexit. You know, that's opening up a lot of trade issues with Russia and the Ukraine. That's opened up a lot of military issues. And so they're just going to look at the relationship between the US and the UK and whether or not they should prioritize it or maybe take a more global stance in things.
Good. I think tonight is going to be a really fascinating debate. There's always been such a unique connection between the United States and the United Kingdom. However, it has been a little bit different since the United Kingdom was a big part of the EU, and then with Brexit happening, you know, it's just a different world now. It's a very different world.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really interesting because you have two teams from each university. And you're going to have British speakers speaking for the resolution and also against it. And you're going to have U.S. speakers saying, yeah, you should prioritize it with us. And you'll have speakers saying, no, don't prioritize it. You know, so it's really unique to get four different perspectives from the different the two nations.
It is.
It'll be fun.
And that was a great lead-in, just to give you a little idea of what to expect out of today's debate, which will be starting in just a few moments. The debaters are entering the room now. Our team, the United States team of Hayden Eder and Lexi Winterbauer, will be the Prime Minister position. So they'll be opening government. So they will be framing the debate. And then we will go over to the leaders of the opposition, which will be a team from Cardiff University. We've got Thomas and Will. Then we have the members of government, which is the other Cardiff team, Nico and Mikola. And then Mikolai. And then we end with the University of Central Missouri's team of Lillian and Fantasia. Mm-hmm. So it'll be very interesting to see these perspectives come from across the table. And I think it will be really neat to see the UCM team open up the debate.
Right. And we have our graduate assistant, Manny Reyes, is serving as the chief adjudicator, and Evan is one of the wingmen, and then we have two from the university, Michael, who's the president of their union, and I didn't get the girl's name, but they will be the adjudication panel. So it's a 2-and-2 mixed panel.
Right.
It'll be interesting. But there's Michael. It looks like he's getting ready to start. So
we're going to turn it over to him for just a moment, and then we will come back to you to provide a little commentary throughout the evening.
Everybody, we'll make a start. Can you hear me okay? Is everything okay? Excellent. Hello everybody. Just in case you don't know who I am, I'm Michael Conway, President of Cardiff University Debating Society, convening today's event. We've got a very special evening today. We have two teams who've come from the University of Central Missouri with a whole entourage as well of sound engineers, camera equipment, and of course some commentators joining us today, as well as our two Cardiff teams who are also debating. So 2 teams from Cardiff, 2 teams from the University of Central Missouri. Today we're debating this motion over here, and one of the chair will be from the University of Central Missouri. We have Marnie over here as a result of a coin flip. Hopefully we're all ready to start, but just as a reminder, it's 7-minute speeches. This is in British parliamentary style. We have a 4-judge panel with Marnie from the University of Central Missouri as chair. After the debate, we will deliberate and then come back with the results. During the debate, there is some live commentary as well, so do stay tuned for that. But other than that, I'm going to stop talking and pass over to our chair, Marnie, and also try and sit down as quietly as possible.
Thank you. I want to give a quick warm welcome and a quick thank you to Cardiff University for hosting us and allowing us to come and debate y'all, taking time out of your day to just let us experience your beautiful city that you live in that we have been enjoying immensely. So I'm Manny Reyes. My pronouns I use he, him, and I'll be chairing the debate over the resolution. This House believes that the UK should prioritize the special relationship with the US. On the panel adjudicating with me is
Evan Kirksey, he, him, from the University of Central Missouri.
Michael Conway, he, him, from Cardiff University.
And Liv Mishduft, she, her, from Cardiff University.
perfect. And I want to go through each position real quick. If y'all can introduce yourselves, tell us your pronouns and where you're from, starting with opening government.
My name's Hayden Eder. I use he, they pronouns. I'm from the University of Central Missouri, and I'm going to be Prime Minister.
I'm Lexi Winterbauer. I am Deputy Prime Minister. I'm from the University of Central Missouri, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Thomas. I'm Deputy Leader of the Opposition from Cardiff University. He, him, please. Leader of the Opposition, sorry. Deputy.
Hi, my name's Will. I'm going to be Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and I use he, him pronouns.
Closing door.
I'm Nico Kerr. I am from Cardiff University, and I go by he, them pronouns. And I'll be member of government.
Hi, my name is Mikołaj Jabłoński. I'm from Cardiff University. I'll be the government whip. My pronouns are he, him, please.
My name is Lillian Rose. I use she, her pronouns from the University of Central Missouri, and I'll be a member of opposition today.
My name's Infinitasia Nading. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from the University of Central Missouri, and I'll be the opposition whip.
Perfect. I want to thank everyone for being here, and with that, we can get started with the Prime Minister.
Alright, so first I wanted to take a moment again to thank everyone for being here. I'm very excited for this educational debate today. So let's go ahead and get started. So, we stand in affirmation of the resolution. This House believes that the UK should prioritize a special relationship with the United States. First off, I'm going to run through a couple definitions, talk a little bit about our status quo, and then run through 2 substantive points of matter today. And then my partner is going to bring up a couple more for you guys. So, first, we defined this House as the United Kingdom. We defined prioritize as providing attention to, but noting that it is not mutually exclusive, and we really want to emphasize that as the government today. And then we defined special relationships as a strong bond between the United States and the UK, which was something that was brought up by Winston Churchill. So first, talking a little bit about our status quo. In today's society, you know, the United States and the UK have had this relationship since the 1900s, I believe. And then, you know, we've kind of taken a step back from this special relationship. We've seen it in the past several years, but it is still very, very important. And so we're going to get into a couple reasons today as why this is important. So just to kind of give an example of something that we can kind of look to understand this motion a little bit better. So let's imagine that you're staying a night at at a friend's house, for example, right? When you're staying as a child, most of the time you would typically go with your friend or whoever to go with your parents to actually ask to stay the night, because that solidarity is more important, and it shows that, you know, more people are wanting something, and typically you're going to get it, right, if more people are involved. So just going into my first substantive point of matter, we're going to talk a little bit about defense. So the United Kingdom and the U.S. rely on each other for multiple different things. You know, the United States supplies a lot of military technology, such as like the missile defense system, and it's important because, you know, Russia is so close to the United Kingdom, and we've seen Russia in the past act on attacking places, just like Ukraine recently. So it's important that as allies, we're providing that security for one another, and we are providing that defense. And kind of the second part of my defense argument, we can look at like the impact of all of this, right? Nuclear energy is something that is a huge problem right now with global warming and our environmental crisis, but we can help by taking the two largest countries and working on essentially trying to combat global warming right now, and people find comfort in these type of things. So if we can show the solidarity as two of the largest nations in the world, we can accomplish pretty much anything. And this is such a direct influence to the motion, even though global warming isn't what we're here arguing today, but you know, people find comfort in these sort of things. So going into my second substantive point of matter, we're going to talk a little bit about economic power. You know, when we work together, when we trade together, we are stronger together. An example of this, the World Trade Association, is something that both the countries use, a lot of countries use, and it makes a stronger alliance for us. This is the best option for us. You know, like I said earlier, prioritizing does not mean that it's mutually exclusive. You know, for example, you can have more than one friend, right? You can't just be limited to just one friend. Like, we all have multiple friends, but you can have certain relationships that are prioritized or a little more important than others. And this special relationship has been something that has and should continue to be a priority for us. Give me just a moment and I'll answer your question. Actually, I can go ahead and take your question now.
Sure. So when you say, when it comes to economic power, the United States is the best option, I'm just wondering why. What is unique about the United States that makes them the best option?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the United States, while we might not have like technically like the strongest economy, right? Like, we still provide a lot of benefits to other countries, as far as, like I said, trading is like a big thing that we should talk about, and supplies and stuff that we share between different countries. So I think that that's something that we really have to look at when we are talking about economic power. So just kind of reiterating my points, you know, first we talked about substantive matter. We talked about, or our first substantive point of matter, we talked about defense and how the United Kingdom and the U.S. rely on each other, and how solidarity is so important. And, you know, we have to think of this as sort of like an umbrella, per se. You know, we help supply things while they also supply things to our country, and in defense, or in return, you know, we have that security, we have that that safety net that is there. And then kind of going into my second point, again, we talked about economic power. You know, when we work together and we trade, we are stronger together. Again, we talked about the World Trade Association, how it makes us a stronger alliance. And I think, just again, we have to really think about, prioritize does not mean mutually exclusive. We can still prioritize this special relationship, and also, you know, have continue to like strengthen our other allyships. So with that, I hope that you vote today in opening government, and thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. With that, I welcome the Leader of Opposition.
Just one moment, please. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so on this side of the House, we are in opposition to this. We believe, this side of the House believe that the UK should not prioritise the special relationship with the United States of America. So first I'm just going to lay out our case and some of the things I'll be touching upon, just the main fundamentals of that, and then I'll be going into various aspects of this debate. For example, the economic impact and foreign affairs. I'll particularly be touching on, and maybe a little bit further afield if I get time. But firstly, we on this side of the House believe that the burden of proof is on the government to say why we should actually prioritise our relationship with the United States across the Atlantic. And so far, I don't think they've done that for reasons I'll outline later on. So. But we believe effectively on this side of the House that, at least on the foreign affairs front, that the USA has actually been, since the end of the Cold War, and even before that, has been a force of aggression and in the international sphere, and has violated a lot of norms, international norms and rules. And I'm going to explain why this is such a big issue in a minute. I'll explain that now. Actually, so USA has been a force of aggression. How? It's been a force of aggression in situations such as Iraq and Afghanistan, but also in more small, less noticeable ways as well, with the way they deal with certain countries and economies in Latin America. Why is this a problem? I think we can use Iraq and Afghanistan as a good example. This war was launched primarily with support from the United States of America. Obviously, the UK got on board with that in light of this special relationship, but this obviously ended up being a disaster affair. Many lives were lost, not to mention the thousands of casualties that were suffered in Iraq as well. And to be on board with this, to be in line with this, was actually, this side of the House believes, a fundamental mistake, because we as the UK, we associated ourselves with this viewpoint, we got on board with this effort, and we actually ended up losing a lot of our own people and causing lots of death and destruction in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. So that is one of the main reasons from the foreign affairs aspect why we do not think we should align ourselves with the United States or particularly prioritise a special relationship. We are open, of course. Allow me to quickly to make certain, to ascertain that we don't think we should completely cut off all connections. Of course, that would not be sensible at all. I'm not saying that at all. We're just saying that we shouldn't prioritise and blindly follow the Americans like we have done in the past. We think that is detrimental. But okay, going on to let's also talking about the aspect of trade, and particularly environmental one. We actually, the UK, were very lucky to be very close to Europe, which is full of very strong economies and capable countries who are leading, really, in many aspects of development and innovation in the world. And so being so close to them, we should prioritise that and make the most of that by trading with them, by doing all of our business with them. This House does not believe that we should be going across the Atlantic to do the majority of that, or prioritising across the Atlantic for that. Why is this? Well, environmental impact. Longer distance. It's simply a longer distance. Requires more air travel, requires more shipping travel. Shipping, especially air travel, obviously causes, due to the jet engines, reduces a lot more carbon emissions into the environment, which is negative because then contributes to global warming, which we all know is one of our key issues facing us in our modern world today. So the environmental aspect of trade with the United States simply is I think the ramifications are actually rather negative. And going on to and sticking on to this topic of the environment, the volatility in a bit. Not in a bit. But speaking about an environment, also the volatility of the US government in terms of its climate policy is another key reason why we shouldn't align ourselves with the US. If we are kind of in tandem with the US and sticking so close through prioritising this special relationship, then we'll kind of be coerced into adopting the same kind of ideas that the American government has about the climate. For example, we've seen the way this turn and throwing of climate policy from the US government. We had, during Obama, obviously Obama was a lot more pro-protecting the environment, whereas Trump obviously reversed a lot of these things, taking US out of the Paris Agreement or something like that. And this was obviously detrimental because we, as the UK, at least on our side of the house, we believe we should strongly commit to combating global warming because the emission, and if the US, the reason we believe that is because global warming is is causing things like flooding, causing things like deadly weather, far more disastrous weather events than before. And if the USA is policy is constantly toing and froing like it has been, it's not going to be easy for the UK to be in line with that if we are prioritising this special relationship. Okay, so I'll touch upon that. I'll take that POI if you have it.
Thank you. The UK has always been one of the leading countries in the world when it comes to implementing environmentally friendly changes. Why do you think that would change if the UK aligns itself more with the US?
Because I understand your question. Say, for example, in the next election, a Republican government was to take power, there was also policies we believe would not necessarily prioritise the protection of the environment. And being in such a close special relationship, we would probably be, I guess, inclined or at least encouraged to kind of support that as well in order to preserve this special relationship, which I think would be detrimental for the overall fight against climate change. Okay, a few other points then. If I may. For example, another thing we think that have been negative is the increase of setup of fast food culture, fast food restaurants in this country. We think this has been an influence that's come onto our country so much since our heightened relationship with America. And why is this bad? Well, we're actually struggling with unhealthy, a severe increase in unhealthy eating practices in this country, which is causing other issues like cancer, heart disease, clogged arteries, things like that. And this is all dramatically worsened by fast food restaurants, because fast food restaurants are an easy way to get food. Often the food that is sold is often very, very low quality. Another iffy point we have really with America and their system, the way they've been dealing with chemicals in chickens, for example, or the extremely unsustainable farming industry in many cases. And so this whole idea, this is obsession with obviously that a lot of businesses in America have of just making food unhealthy and quick and easy is not really what we line up with, because we do think it can contribute to unhealthy eating practices and health problems. Okay, so yeah, we as the House, of course I've said we should not prioritise relationship. Also, we must not forget, the EU I've spoken about a little bit, but because, the main reason for that is not just because what I've already said, but also because of the more common views we have on things like regulation of food industries, but other things as well, like our economic systems, and obviously lobbying as well. I've seen, obviously we all know, is quite huge within Washington DC. And again, if we are to prioritise a special relationship, we're in line. We're effectively not necessarily we're as good as supporting really if we're prioritising that, because we're providing that sort of we're just in line with it. Whereas if we're not in this special relationship, if we're thinking more about countries close to home who line up more with our moral and economic ideal on the world, then we will have a better UK. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that speech. And I want to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hello everybody, I'm Lexi. I'm going to be the Deputy Prime Minister, so I'm going to be telling you why we stand in affirmation, why we believe that the United Kingdom should prioritize a special relationship. But first, I'm going to go through the opposition's case, rebut some things, and then give you 2 additional substantive points of matter why we should take this debate today. So, let's talk about the first argument from the opposition. So their first point of argument was the U.S. has been aggressive and has violated a lot of international contracts and a lot of laws and things like that. But to kind of respond to that, if the U.S. is so powerful and if we have that much power, we should be prioritizing this relationship. This should be a strength that we have. The United States is powerful, it's strong, it's big, and that should be working in our favor. This is kind of why the opposition's point works in our favor today, and I'm going to talk to you about that in my other 2 points of matter. But the response is just, if we're powerful, if the United States is powerful, then the United Kingdom should want more security. Their second argument was the trade or environmental aspect of this. They talked about how the United Kingdom is in close relation to all of Europe, and they focus on environmental impacts. So just kind of saying that it's very harmful to trade overseas and things like that. But let's look at what will happen if we don't prioritize, if we don't work on strengthening this relationship. A lot of things can go wrong and will go wrong, and I'm going to talk more about that in my other 2 points. The next argument they have is the United Kingdom will become coerced by eco-laws, and I talk about fast food culture. But to that I say nations are separate nations, so they can disagree while still upholding this healthy relationship. There isn't to say that because we prioritize this relationship that we immediately have to switch to everything that the United States believes because we're separate nations. We operate differently. This doesn't mean that the United Kingdom is going to fall under control of the United States. We're just saying that this relationship needs to be strengthened. So with the rebuttal being done, I'm going to give you 2 more points of substantive matter. So first, let's title this next one as diplomatic help. So let's just kind of talk about how the United States and the United Kingdom represent 2 of the 5 councils in the United Nations. So when we are these 2 strong councils, it's difficult to make any moves against the 2 nations, which is why moves haven't been made against the 2 nations, which is why we haven't seen China or Russia try to invade or declare war against us, because we're so strong and powerful together, right? We can also talk about, because our relationship is so good, we can kind of be role models for other nations. We can show this positive relationship can be effective and beneficial as it has been for a very, very long time. My next point of substantive matter, let's title this one War on Information. So the United States and the United Kingdom trade satellite information, international crime information, world terrorism fights, and it makes us more powerful when we have these 2 great nations that can focus on these issues together. So we want to improve the quality of life, right? We want to make our lives better. We want to prioritize this relationship because of the direct effect that it has on us as people, right? Our everyday lives. So when we can prioritize this, when we can make nods to this, when we can prioritize our international safety and security, nothing bad can really come from this. We need to ask ourselves today, what bad is going to come from prioritizing it? We also address that this doesn't mean exclusively. There's no mutual exclusivity. There's nothing that's saying we do this or we don't. It's just saying that we strengthen it. We make it more important. And I will take a point of information.
So if you're talking about in your first and second point of substantive matter that we're already doing these things in the status quo, like we're already trading information, we've already been exchanging all this diplomatic help, why would prioritizing it make any difference if we're doing it right now in the status quo?
Right, yeah. I think we can see right now that the United States and the United Kingdom are not getting along, right? It's kind of shaky, which is why we need to prioritize it now. Nothing bad can come from it. Strengthening it isn't a bad thing, right? Making something stronger that has such a big impact on our lives directly in these 2 nations, where we are, what we're talking about today, nothing wrong can come from that. So with my time I've got left, I would like to go over my first 2 points and kind of tell you why these matter and why they hold weight in today's debate and why opening government's going to win today. So our first point was defense. We are a nuclear deterrent. The reason why this is important is because the United States directly protects Britain. And not even only Britain, the United Kingdom, but we supply things like my partner mentioned, the missile defense system. We have a lot of things that are benefits to the United Kingdom, which is why this is important today. Our second point, economic power. When we work together, we can get what we want. Power in numbers. Let's think about that. Let's think about my partner's example. When we were kids, we would go with our friend to ask if we could hang out with each other. We wouldn't go by ourselves. That's kind of what we're saying today. There's power in numbers and there's power and strength in relationships. So the third point, diplomatic help. The United States and the United Kingdom represent 2 of 5 councils. This is why it's important. This is kind of the meat of our debate today. This is what the government's saying. Being good role models isn't a bad thing. Whenever we say prioritize this relationship, we're not exclusively saying that this is the only relationship that these 2 nations will focus on. We're saying that this is struggling right now and it needs more attention, right? The fourth point, war on information, talking about how we trade these things, how it's important, and how it directly affects our lives, right? Focusing on terrorism is important, and when we can get these 2 great nations to do this and kind of harp on these things and improve it as we go along, what comes from that? Improvements in quality of life. That's why this is important today. So with all of these substantive points of matter that I talked about, we really just need to think about the quality of life. What comes from prioritizing this? Nothing bad. We need to think about that. Nothing bad can come from prioritizing it because we're not only focusing on this. We can still have our other relationships, but this one just needs to be strengthened because we've had it for so long and because especially right now at this time it's struggling. So this is why I urge a vote in opening government today. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. I now want to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Right, just take a second to set up plans. Okay. Okay, starting
Now, thank you very much. First of all, I'd just like to say it is an honour and a privilege to be speaking today and to be with you all. This is a really great event, and I'm thrilled to be taking part. So I'm going to be continuing the case for the opposition that Britain should not prioritise its special relationship with the United States. I'm going to start with some rebuttal and then move to some points, crucially on military matters and political, cultural matters too. I'll also make some further points if I have time. So first of all, a really crucial thing to remember here when rebutting this debate and when understanding some of the fraught arguments presented by the government's case is that we are claiming, as we have defined, for a looser relationship with the United States, but we do not want to sever relations. We do not, for example, want to leave NATO, one of the most foundational peremptory organisations around the world today. A lot of the points made by the government are invalidated when we consider this crucial fact. For example, the Deputy Leader of the government talked about a looser relationship impacting global unity. Well, I don't think that it necessarily would, and it wouldn't, because if Britain left NATO, for example, there would be no obligation for Britain to defend other NATO member states or for the United States to defend Britain if invaded, especially with nuclear weapons. However, we are not claiming this. What we simply want to see is that Britain has a stronger relationship with European states and with other like-minded states, and rather makes a looser relationship with the United States. Secondly, diplomatic help. Actually, this may surprise some people, but the US has surprisingly few embassies around the world. Its global footprint is actually measured in its McDonald's branches all around the world, and unfortunately in combat casualty statistics too. It's a fraught relationship, but one of the things that we would like to see is a strong relationship with European countries, many of whom are represented not only through their national embassies, but through European Union embassies all around the world. Next, we talked about power. Well, power is not necessarily indicative of favourable views on key issues, as we will talk about. The US is certainly a powerful country, that we are not disputing. What we are disputing, however, is that they align with us on issues that matter in a crucial way, more than other states that Britain can align itself with. They talk, for example, about staying at a friend's house, and you shouldn't be limited to one friend. This is a valuable analogy, as we believe that it's also valuable to not stay at one's friend's house, but if one of your friends, for example, decides that one morning he's going to invade another country because they have weapons of mass destruction, which later turns out to be a complete lie, we think that maybe you should consider other friends when it comes to issues like that. In this regard, we're going to talk about military matters. So first of all, we believe the US is not necessarily a force for peace around the world. It's instigated many conflicts around the world since 1991, caused considerable political and economic fallout to already impoverished communities already around the world. My partner has already spoken about Iraq, Afghanistan. Libya is a further example that cannot be discounted. Bombings in Kosovo in the 90s, an act actually deemed illegal by the United Nations, also cannot be ignored. It's relevant because British Armed Forces personnel, under the leadership of US military strategy, operated a system of aggressive campaigns against the world, in many cases to prevent terror, but which in many cases actually contributed to said terror and merely caused greater horrific destruction all around the world. In this regard, we look for the example of the atrocious example of Abu Ghraib prison, I'm sorry if I can't pronounce that right, in Iraq, in which British military personnel committed atrocious war crimes under the leadership of US military strategy. This is an awful example of British influence around the world being at a detriment due to its incredibly close relationship with the United States. Of course, we will note that whereas other European and NATO member states took a close relationship in the war with terror with the United States, we also note this was in no way this did not measure up to the same relationship that Britain took. Britain contributed significantly magnitudes more troops, magnitudes more military resources to the Middle East and to other areas alongside the US. Of course, many of the reasons for doing so were considered to increase global security. As we now know, with this current political situation in Afghanistan, this is no longer the case, and actually some would consider to be a failed mission. In this regard, we would rather that Britain operated a similar system to other European countries. We will use France as an example, who committed significantly fewer troops, still honoured its NATO commitments, but rather offered a system of political, military and cultural aid, using, for example, Britain's wide international system of embassies and spies to provide information to the United States in its efforts, but not necessarily engaging British lives in combat in the same way. Next, I would like to touch on the issue of Taiwan and the issue of a second global Cold War. This is actually an incredibly relevant issue, as things like, for example, the recent Russian aggression in Ukraine indicates that the world is on course for a completely changed political culture within our lifetimes. Now, it becomes apparent to us, first of all, to understand what role the United States will play in this, what role Britain may potentially play in this due to its close relationship with the United States, what role Britain could play if it prioritised other countries, and also, therefore, what the situation in Taiwan may likely be. Now, Taiwan was once part of China. It is now officially the Republic of China, an offshoot country considered by China, but considered an independent sovereign state by the United States, the United Kingdom, and essentially all of NATO and the Western political coalition. If the US has already committed to defending it militarily against the People's Republic of China, should something happen, yes?
I was just going to ask, how will strengthening our relationship initiate a second Cold War?
Well, I'm going to just touch on that shortly, because actually Britain has the choice now of whether or not it wants to fight alongside the US through its increased political and military closeness with it, or whether or not it wants to merely match its NATO obligations in defence without actually pursuing a policy similar to that of the US. The US has already committed to defending Taiwan. This would be an incredibly bloody affair, halfway across the world for Britain. Britain instead thinks that we instead should say that the role for defending Taiwan, should something happen, be for countries like India, for Japan, for other Indo-Pacific states that are aligned with the United States' geopolitical values, because British lives should not be lost in this war. Finally, I'd just like to touch on the issue of a violent political culture. The US has, in the last couple of years, unfortunately demonstrated an incredibly violent political culture when the Capitol was stormed on the 6th of January in 2021. This is a culture that Britain is not keen to import, and by loosening its relationship, it would be able to maintain values more traditionally associated with Britain, like plurality and less tense political climate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for concluding the top half of the debate. I see the Member of Government to start the second half.
So we kind of did this debate following major shifts across the world and major shifts across the UK. While these arguments that have been made so far would have been great possibly in 2019, 2016, we're in 2023, and Brexit has happened. And the fact is, with Brexit having happened, we see a European relationships with the UK are at they are struggling. They are having, we had issues with finding a deal, and we've ended up in the situation currently. We came out of the EU with a number of issues, and we have a number of trade issues from the economy and everything. And as we look towards what we can do further, we must seek where we can find an ally. And the fact is, while we can, of course, continue to work to improve these European relationships, it is not like we are going to have a second referendum anytime soon under the current government. And it is not like we are going to see us return back to the EU anytime soon. And I don't think many people in Europe necessarily want to see something like that.
Are you sure that's necessarily true, with it being very likely that, due to current opinion polling, that the Conservatives, the party who support remaining out of the EU, are likely to lose the next election?
I mean, again, there is a democratic justification you have to be able to make in order to see that. And you have to say whether or not the British people, we don't know necessarily whether the British people want another referendum. We just know that they are, fed up with the current issue. But of course, we must look, but anyways, my point still stands that we must look towards where we can find an ally, and that is in the United States. Now, the United States has been a global power, and this is something that the government has brought up, and this is something that is very important in the global exchange. Again, we see a rising China, we see a rising Russian aggression towards people such as Ukraine, the current Ukraine war, and we see rising conflict across Eastern Europe. And in a time where we see these sorts of powers that are rising that could pose a potential threat to the UK, we have to look toward where we can find an ally that will be able to lead us into the future. yes, you can say, oh, we can look to the past, but again, we must look towards the future of the UK, and this is something that is a key part of this debate as we look towards the post-Brexit world. And, you know, again, when we look towards a post-Brexit world, there's also, of course, again, as we look toward, and again, the European Union was not necessarily the strongest when it came to Ukraine. It was not necessarily the strongest when it came towards opposing these sorts of aggressive actions. But the U.S. has been there, standing alongside the UK and being top donors towards helping the war in Ukraine and protecting against Russian aggression.
When we look at things like Ukraine and Taiwan, the UK isn't actually involved with these situations, well, let's say with Ukraine at the moment. Whereas if we align ourselves close with the US, then surely we're more likely to be involved in the tension of war reaching our troops is surely higher if we prioritise a special relationship.
If we prioritize a special relationship, again, I mean, the government can make whatever. Again, you act as if we have to stand step in step with everything that the U.S. does just because we are aligning ourselves with the U.S. And that is simply not the case. Again, you see this with other allies. They can, you know, prioritize their own policies. But again, the war in Ukraine is not just an isolated thing, and it's something that affects a lot of people across Europe. And this is something that is very, you know, important as we look towards the future. And again, Biden was there in Ukraine. We did not see that from the EU. Biden was there on the battleground, and it's a historic thing. Again, this is one of the few times the U.S. president has gone to a place where the U.S. does not have an active military presence by U.S. troops. This is something, you know, again, something that is very unique to the United States. And while you can make this argument, we have seen this from the opposition, of, oh, changing governments. Again, regardless of government, the UK has been a leader on global climate change. We have been a leader on fighting these sorts of big issues, and it does not mean that we have to change that just because we choose to prioritize helping build our relationship with the United States. And again, when we look towards the United States and economic impact that this could have, we look towards people like Canada. Now, Canada is a key part in this because, of course, it is a top trading partner with the U.S. and is also a Commonwealth country. And so in many ways, it bridges the gap between the U.S. and the UK. And when we look towards prioritizing a relationship where we have closer ties with the U.S. and have closer ties with people like Canada, again, it looks toward places where we can find a free trade agreement that taps into NAFTA, and that brings in, you know, a bigger market where, of course, the UK can take advantage in order to build its economy and to create a mutually beneficial economic support system. And that is something that we must do. And again, we must prioritize this because we are in a post-Brexit world where, again, we have to find people who are close. And again, they talk about distance. Of course, I'm from the United States, and it's a 6-hour difference. And of course, you know, that is far, but it is not as far as, of course, many other places we could possibly try to find an ally in. And it is one of the biggest powers in the world. It is a consistently high military power, and it is something that, of course, we can will benefit us and benefit towards defending global peace. And so, you know, as we look towards the future, you know, it's very important that, you know, the UK look towards places where it can find that sort of economic benefit. And that's why we must bring it to the agenda, because, of course, while it may be an argument to have had that we should align ourselves with the EU in 2019 and 2016, we are in a post-Brexit world, and that is a very different world, and that is something that we have to, you know, get used to, because again, regardless of whether or not Starmer becomes the next prime minister or we have a Labour government, it does not necessarily guarantee that we're going to be able to find the votes to have another referendum, never mind whether or not that referendum will be able to pass, and so we must look towards where we can find a way forward.
Thank you, Member Government for that speech. And I want to welcome the Member of Opposition.
Alrighty. The order of this speech is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm first going to hit on two main points of clarification to help us better judge this round. I'll then be going over some of the things that we heard from the top half of the debate, before finally providing some refutation to the member of government, and then depending on time, providing 2 to 3 more new points for this debate. So the first thing that I want to hit on is that the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister spent quite a bit of time clarifying what prioritized means. They say that you're just providing attention to. You can do other things. And while we do agree with this, we do just want to point out that prioritize means to place one thing higher than another, meaning that we would be placing the special relationship with the United States and UK, on a pedestal, whereas focusing on other things such as focusing on European nations. The second thing that I want to touch on is that the Deputy Prime Minister made it clear in their speech that we need to be focusing on quality of life, and closing opposition absolutely agrees. And that's why as we go down the flow and some of the arguments that have been made in this debate, I'll point out to you why quality of life substantially is harmed whenever we pass this motion. With that, let's get into some of the things we heard on the top half of the debate. From the government, we heard that there would be a betterment of defense overall. There would be more security. We also heard that there would be more economic power, more diplomatic help, and the war on information. We would have more information being shared. As I go down our points and some of the points of refutation, I'll touch on these. From opposition, on the other hand, we heard that foreign affairs, when we look at the United States, they have an absolutely aggressive nature. And closing opposition absolutely agrees with this. They also speak about geographical location, how we should be focusing on other European nations. It's cheaper to trade, all of the benefits. They also talked about health, how there's an increase in fast food companies, and finally military, that the United States once again is not peaceful. With that out of the way, I want to get onto some refutation to some of the points that member of government brought up during that very last speech. One of the first things that they discussed is that European relations are struggling in the status quo. And we absolutely agree with this, but I have 2 major points of refutation against this point. First, that's why we prioritize. That's why we would prioritize favoring our relations with other European nations rather than focusing on the United States. The second is that we can see that the same thing is true with the United States. We don't have good relations with the United States in the status quo, and I'll get into that into our major second point of substantive matter. The second main point brought up by member of government during that last speech is that people don't want to return to the European Union. I have 1 point of refutation. Factually, this is untrue. If you look at any major statistics, we see that 60% of Britons actually want to return to the EU. So just factually, not true. The third major argument brought up by the member of government is that we see rising China and Russian aggression. And again, closing opposition absolutely agrees. But that unfortunately means that in the status quo, the United States plate is extremely full. We don't have time to have a mutually beneficial relationship with the UK. And because of that, the United Kingdom doesn't get any benefits, meaning we're wasting our time and resources. And lastly, they talk about economic impact. I have 3 arguments against this. One, whenever I asked the Prime Minister during that very first speech, why the United States? We need the uniqueness in this debate. Why are we prioritizing the relationship with the United States rather than other European nations brought up by opening opposition? That's a question that government has refused to answer over and over again. Without that uniqueness point, there's really no room to vote for the government and vote for passing this motion. The second thing that I want to hit on is that we see other major points of solvency to benefiting the UK's economy, such as looking towards other European nations. And again, if I have time to get into my third main point of substantive matter, I'll discuss this a little bit further. With that, I want to get into the first major point of substantive matter. Britain's wants. In the status quo, Britain does not want to further a special relationship with the United States. In fact, in August of 2021, US President Joe Biden was denounced, in the British Parliament after the United States left Afghanistan, which the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson stated was shameful and also blindsided the UK. But even further, he stated that he believes that the United States is laser focused on themselves and themselves only. And unfortunately, closing opposition agrees with this. And furthermore, we see that whenever Biden was talking to Boris Johnson, he referred to Boris Johnson as having the same physical and emotional characteristics as Trump, which clearly shows a disdain or dislike. What is the impact of this argument? Knowing that both parties aren't favorable of a relationship means that said relationship will be weak and fragile. Moreover, we would also be going against what both countries truly want. For that reason alone, we don't prioritize a relationship with the United States. Let's get into the second main point of substantive material. The United States plate is full, and government actually concedes this when they continuously bring up things such as Russia and Ukraine and all of these major foreign conflicts that we have in the status quo. So because of this, the United States is not in a position to form a mutually beneficial relationship with the United Kingdom. In the status quo, our current federal foreign budget is set at $38 billion. We see that we've spent millions of dollars over this. The argument is that we've been focusing on other countries. We don't have time to focus on the United Kingdom and providing all of the benefits that the government says they're actually going to have. And so because of this, we understand that the United States is currently bogged down, and secondarily, we also see that government, both first and second, have already agreed to this when they continue to talk about foreign affairs. The third main point of substantive matter that I just want to get into is discussing that of Brexit, or other points of solvency to provide points of advantages to the United Kingdom. So passing this motion and focusing on the relationship between the UK and the United States produces an overall lack of solvency and progression. And we know that because throughout the speeches from the three major speakers from the government, they failed to tell us what any of the major benefits would be, while factually backing those up. 7 years after the 2016 referendum and 3 years after Brexit actually happened, opinion has shifted. In the status quo, more than 60% of Britons believe that the Brexit was the wrong decision and want to rejoin the EU. But furthermore, this is because the United Kingdom's economy is estimated to be 5.5% poorer now than if it would have actually stayed in the EU. This is impactful because Brexit has an increase in unemployment, inflation rates, homelessness rates, and poverty rates. We see an overall struggling of the economic infrastructure in the UK and the status quo, and unfortunately, the United States is unable to fix this. The smart choice for the UK is rejoining the EU, or again, just focusing on other European nations. The argument is that there should be something done. The United Kingdom should be focusing on a relationship, but it definitely in any world should not be the United States in its current state and form. For all these reasons, I ask you to stand with closing opposition.
Thank you, member of opposition. I now want to welcome the government whip.
Give me a second, I have tons of paper, so... Okay, before I start, I once again wanted to thank the team from the University of Central Missouri for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. And yeah, actually, I have nothing more to say. We're very happy to have you guys. I will start my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In this speech, I will go through opening opposition's argument, closing opposition's argument, and then tell you all why closing government took this debate. Firstly, opening opposition. Why do you treat UK like just a puppet of the United States and that would listen to everything that the US wants to say? Because what we've heard from opening opposition is that for whatever reason, the health would worsen just because, I don't know, UK would have more fast foods. That's what we've heard from the opening opposition. That's just not true. Of course, US, with all due respect, is kind of infamous for the fast food culture. However, fast foods are all over the world. It's literally as it was said in this debate. McDonald's is everywhere. Subway is everywhere. Fast food exists. You didn't prove that. Firstly, it would happen. Secondly, that it matters in this debate. Secondly, environment. As I proved one of my questions, UK has always been the leading country when it comes to implementing environmental changes. And by joining the US, by being closer to the US, nothing will change. Yeah, Trump happened. Yes, that's happened. But still, US is still not the worst country in the world when it comes to environmental changes. Of course, it can do more. But just being closer to the United States doesn't mean would automatically worsen the UK's position on environmental changes. You didn't prove that. Secondly, war history and our main argument. I'm really sorry to say this. In the context of this debate, previous invasions conducted by US don't matter. In context of this debate, I want to make that clear. Previous invasions portrayed by the US don't matter. What matters now is war in Ukraine. And that's the main reason, that's the main argument that I'm going to focus on while going over our arguments. However, before I said that, economic argument. Both to opening and closing opposition. European Union hates the UK. After the UK left in a shameful manner, as a person from Eastern Europe, I kind of have a different perspective, but UK left in a shameful manner. EU and the European Commission humiliated the UK, especially Theresa May's government and the few votes on deal and no deal. The EU doesn't want to make business with the UK anymore. The EU hates the UK. One symbol, any football game. Everyone became a France fan when there was the game between France and the UK and England. Do we love France? No. Do you hate do people hate the UK even more? Even more? Absolutely. European Union doesn't want to do business with the UK. If it wanted to, it would do so much more to actually maintain them. Yes?
Does the UK want to do business with the United States or further its relationship?
Absolutely. Absolutely they do. Of course they do, because right now they're aware, and actually I'm going to come back to mention your point. Yes, you said that most of British people want to rejoin European Union. Absolutely, that is true. I do not blame them. That's actually the reasonable thing. But here is the sad truth. It's not going to happen. UK is probably never rejoining European Union. Thank you. I'm not taking any more of yours. UK is probably never joining European Union. EU would not, unless there is a huge change in government. At least it takes ages right now. All the procedures in order for the UK to be withdrawn from the EU have to be finished. And then rewritten again. It's going to take decades. It's not possible. So even the generation of our people our age, if they wanted to EU, that's not going to happen. Therefore, it's more sensible for the United Kingdom to go towards the US. Because right now they're in a situation when there are so many problems with all the trade tariffs within the European Union that it's not possible, not feasible to actually have a proper relationship. Because once again, UK is to be blamed for Brexit. UK is to be blamed for the current situation they have with the European Union. It's not EU's fault that Brexit happened. It's UK's fault and UK's fault only.
Point of information?
Actually, yeah, go for it.
Well, if the EU is so opposed to doing any business with UK, well, why was it also opposed to a no-deal Brexit?
Because no-deal Brexit will, of course, mean EU losing stuff. Of course, EU is losing on UK not being in it. But it's more important, and it's been proven time and time again, we have a recession in this country right now. Why do we have a recession? Partially because we left the European Union. We, contrary to what was said on the leave side, UK gained more than it paid for the European Union, but it's too late for that. Therefore, I'm actually going to come to my main argument. War in Ukraine. European Union did not have a clear answer to war in Ukraine. Two examples, Germany and Hungary. Germany for a very long time actually built Nord Stream 2 in order to strengthen the gas relations with with Russia. Hungary stopped every single, the first few sanctions on Russia just because Orban is friends with Putin. Therefore, by being closer to the United States as the UK, we can actually help prevent worsening crisis in Ukraine. As my partner said, we live basically in a new Cold War, where there is Russia and there is US. And right now, if we, by the United Kingdom, knowing that EU isn't an option anymore, stand closer to the United States, we actually can help strengthen NATO, and by strengthening NATO, we can actually help the NATO Eastern expansion that's preventing further aggression from Russia, because it happened so many times. Chechnya, Georgia 2007, Ukraine since 2014. Russia is a bad guy, and by not aligning ourselves with the US, we'll be doing nothing to help that. US and the UK, and Poland of course, are the three countries who did the most for Ukraine. And therefore, by strengthening our relationship with the UK, with the US, both in NATO and in G5, as mentioned on the closing composition, would be helping Ukraine. Another thing, by strengthening our relation with the United States, we would counter China in the race for the global power #1. Why? Because European Union doesn't have ambitions to overtake China. China has been growing and growing steadily since the Deng Xiaoping revolution for 30 years. Right now, we have a chance, as United Kingdom, post-Brexit United Kingdom and United States, to level the playing field and stop China from being the power #1. Why? China is bad. China is a bad country that portrays human rights violations on a daily basis. I'm just gonna come back and say why closing government with this debate. Firstly, we were the only team that actually explained that Brexit matters. It's not the 2015 anymore, Brexit matters. Secondly, we brought the widest implications. Firstly, international ones, Ukraine and China. Our closer relationship with the US, we directly allow for more liberal dominance in the world. And as the UK believes in liberal agenda, the UK is a liberal democracy, therefore UK believes in that. And thirdly, we proved that there is no possibility of having any other closer allies than United States, because European Union doesn't want us there. European Union hates us, and that's why we should be closer to the United States. That's why CG. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Government Whip. I'd like to conclude the debate by welcoming the opposition whip.
So I just want to say thank you again. I'm really glad to be here and to debate this topic. So I'm just going to get started with some refutation onto what the government whip said, and then go into some voters as to why we, the closing op, have brought you the most unique arguments in today's round, and why we should actually get your one specifically in today's round. So let's start with that refutation. The first thing we saw from the government whip was they talked about a few key ideas. The first being that the United Kingdom is not a puppet, and that they were portrayed as so, and that their worst health really is not true. But we're seeing this happen. United States culture is very prevalent across the entire nation. We are a leader. We are the mother country. We rub off on other countries all the time. Fast food proclamated inside of the United States and has spread to various countries because of that. And so the worst health issues, the things like cancer and those things that are occurring because of that, are still happening and are going to increase when we sublime to those different cultures. Now, the second thing here, he talked about environment and how the UK is leading in environmental changes. And to this, we're going to say that even if there are some environmental changes here, we're going to see that the United States doesn't really want to do business with the United Kingdom anyways. We have already prioritized them to the point where we are literally maxed out. We have spent our maximum budget here. In doing so, it's going to harm us and also harm the United Kingdom, because we're going to give these false pretenses that, hey, we can help you with these things, but in reality, we seriously cannot afford to do so. So it's just a false precedent that we're going to do something and make literally no change. The next thing they talked about is how previous invasions don't matter, and they're talking about the status quo, and so are we. And they talked about how the EU hates the United Kingdom and how they have left in a shameful manner, and that the United Kingdom was ashamed of the EU. But first, we see that the United States doesn't want to further the support with the UK when we are already overloaded, as we've spoken about before. And secondly, the EU has actually already entertained the idea of the United Kingdom rejoining. So I'm a little confused as to why he would say that the EU hates the United Kingdom when they're already saying that they would entertain this idea. And the EU lost things too, like that was brought up in that question. And so obviously the EU is going to want to bring back some of that monetary gain if they can possibly do so, some of those trading insights that they want to have. So it makes sense that while the UK might be a little bit less off, the EU still wants to have those benefits and would let them rejoin as they've already entertained it. The next thing they talked about was the war on Ukraine, and they talked specifically about Germany and Hungary and how we can help prevent a worse crisis in Ukraine. But this is really a false allegation. One, we are already giving millions and millions of dollars to Ukraine. And with that being said, we have given almost all of our international budget to them. And so for me, it just is really like, he doesn't prove that there is a tipping point, that if we prioritize them, there's going to be this tipping point in helping prevent more crisis. If we're already giving all this money, all this aid, doing as much as we possibly can, simply prioritizing our relationship is not the tipping point in ending this Ukraine crisis. It's going to continue to occur. The next thing they talked about is China and how we're not going to allow them to overtake the United States or become this big bad country. But that's already happening in the status quo. And prioritizing their relationship, he never really created a link here. He simply said prioritizing the relationship is not going to allow China to be the big bad guy. But he never gave you a link. He never actually said why, what's the tipping point, what actually causes China to not be able to overtake us simply because we prioritize our relationship. And so because of that, that argument can't really stand.
And so when we look to what the round really boils down to, it's going to come down to some key voting issues. The first is going to be that of realism. In my partner's last speech, this is one of the biggest reasons why you will vote closing opposition for today's round, because we brought this unique argument into the round of a realistic point of view. What can the United States actually offer the UK in terms of solvency? And that is almost barely nothing. If you prioritize the relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States, you're not going to make things any better. And something that was said in the at the beginning, at the top of the half of the case, they said that nothing bad can happen, so why not do it? But that's not true. You bite our disadvantages when we talked about how it's going to actually hurt the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom because we're pushing ourselves to a limit that we simply cannot afford. Or even like when we talked about Brexit, how these relationships are struggling and it's going to get worse, and these ideas, you're going to bite those disads. And then the second key voting issue is going to be, what does both the government and the opposition worlds look like, and what are the impacts behind that? So when we look to the government side, we're going to see that, one, it's a waste of our resources, a waste of finances, and furthering a relationship that has little to no benefit, but rather harms. They've created these false implications that we're going to not allow China to take over the world, or we're going to solve the war in Ukraine, or that the EU hates the United Kingdom. But this is simply not true, and so these allegations, they're not really creating solvency. Yes?
Thank you. How would you explain the plausibility of the UK rejoining the EU if, since Brexit, there's still a government dominated by people who wanted to leave in the first place, so there is just no agency in the people to rejoin? Thank you.
Sure. So to that, I would say that the EU has still already entertained the idea of the United Kingdom rejoining them. They've had discussions about it and have wanted to do some type of cooperation with them in the status quo. And so I think that even if there's not like that necessarily guidance right there happening right now, we still know that there is a strong possibility, and that would create far more benefits than the harms that's going to happen with rejoining the United States. So let's go back to that voting where we talk about the government and the opposition and what the true impacts look like. And let's look at the opposition. We're going to see that we can actually focus on benefiting international relations with economics and defense rather than further perpetuating the issues that we see currently in the status quo. We can't allow these harms to continue to perpetuate between the UK and the United States and offer these false harms of we're going to help you do all these things when we are not going to be able to fulfill our promise, and that's not what the United States should be doing. The second thing here is that we don't force the United Kingdom and the United States to further their special relationship when both parties have made it exceedingly clear that they are opposed to this idea. It simply makes no sense to pin two parties against each other if they truly do not want to do so. And so when we look back to some main key ideas in this round where we talked about defense, economic power, even the military, we're going to see that the pretenses that the government brings to you for solvency did not have true linkages. They never showed us that prioritizing the relationship is going to create a true tipping point to cause any of those changes. And so because of a lack of links and because of a proper creation of solvency in the opposition world, and because of the uniquenesses that closing opposition brings you with our 3 points of substantive matter, we ask for you to vote the one for closing opposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Opposition whip for concluding the debate. And now we go to the page.
Yes, that's right. Just a matter of cameras and recording equipment. Are you okay with us adjudicating here and then speakers leaving the room?
We'll be chatting, but that's totally fine. Like, we'll just be kind of quiet, and if you all are good there, that's great. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, these guys will want to talk anyway, so it might be. How loud can it be in this room for you guys to work?
It can be as loud as it needs to be. We're fine.
Oh, fine. Okay. In that case, speakers, I think you should go outside. You can either take the room next door. In fact, go and hang out in there. I think that'd be best. Have a chat, shake hands. We're discussing here. Absolutely. Or you can go next door. It's completely up to you. So you can do whatever you like. Thank you.
I'll give us a sec to get your rankings in order and everything.
I'm dead.
All right, that concludes tonight's debate with Cardiff University. Over the motion, this House believes the UK should prioritize the special relationship with the United States. And that was a super fun debate. I thought both sides of the table brought up some fantastic arguments. I thought we had that little mic drop truth bomb with the Brexit bomb there in the bottom half. That completely changed things, but that was great.
Changed
It needed
direction.
to be said.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to talk about because that was really fun. That was a great example of some awesome clash on a very interesting topic, and I would say a pretty well-balanced debate all the way down the table. So, just before we dive into analyzing the debate a little bit more, in case people joined us late in the broadcast, Jack, could you provide again just a little bit of historical context for us so we understand what this special relationship is?
Yeah, the special relationship is a term that was coined by Winston Churchill as Prime Minister. And what he did was point out the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom at the close of World War I through World War II because of our extremely similar cultures, political affiliations, our military, our international ties, and so that's the special relationship.
Got it. Very, very good. And obviously, that looked a little bit different back in the day.
It did,
in comparison to a post-Brexit world.
Right.
Yeah.
Things change.
Things change, yes. And we start to see a little bit more of that as we go down the table of tonight's debate. So let's just dive in, thinking about the Prime Minister and the opening government speeches. What do you think were some of the key points of analysis they brought up that really held up throughout the entire debate?
Well, I think they were smart to talk about prioritize and what that means. That it does not mean that it's an either or situation, that you have to be totally U.S. or totally non-U.S.
Yes.
And I think that came down the table, and I think that's a key point.
Yeah.
I thought one point that didn't make it down the table very well that I thought should have is the whole idea of the military alliance and nuclear deterrence.
Sure.
I think that's a key factor that they brought up that I think still to a certain extent stands in the debate. Those are probably the two strongest arguments that I think probably made it down.
Right, right. I did think it was extremely powerful and important when Lexi brought up in her speech that just because that relationship is strengthened, it doesn't necessarily mean that you just naturally adopt the ideologies of that other country. However,
that's a good one, yeah.
That's a good point, though, because we often do pick up on the ideologies of the people that we are closest to. So, interesting point to consider, but I thought that was a really, really great point that she brought up. And you're right. There was a lot of emphasis placed on that, the military component and nuclear power. That didn't really come down the table, although military power was definitely a theme throughout.
Come down the table.
Right.
But no one really wanted to talk about the idea of nuclear deterrence and that sort of thing.
Right, right. Okay, so hopping across the table then to the leader of the opposition, we had some really good points brought up on this side as well. Anything sticking out is like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I have some fundamental, I guess, differences with opening opposition, having spent 42 years in the military.
That's the fun of debate, though. That's the fun of debate.
It is.
You get to have these, but sometimes you have to argue in favor of them.
I thought that opening opposition did a very good job of rebutting.
Yeah.
I thought that their substantive points were good, and certainly portrayed the other edge to that dual-edged sword.
Right.
And so, trying to point out that Brexit might be a better partner and that there was almost
the EU.
The EU, and there's almost a contagion effect, aligning with the U.S. that basically, we're bad in every way imaginable, and just don't want to do that.
Right, right.
So, I found his point about the food and the humor was really
so good.
fun.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's one of the things that we absolutely love about British parliamentary style debate. They value a little bit of wit and humor.
Right.
And so, yes, for us, that was a really lighthearted, fun moment where we felt a little called out because, yeah. It's funny the amount of U.S. fast food restaurants we've seen pop up in the UK, even in our short tenure. Well, you've been coming a few more years than I have.
A couple.
But yeah, they're kind of all over the place.
They are.
I did think that his point about region and location and distance was really, really good, though. In terms of trade and thinking about the impacts, the environmental impacts specifically, dealing with trade makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. We don't usually do a lot of trade in airplanes.
Right.
You know, it's mostly, with us, it would be mostly shipping. With the EU, it's also mostly shipping, although there's, you can go...
Shorter distance.
Yeah, a shorter distance.
Right.
So, yeah, that would have a less of a carbon footprint.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's a good point.
Yeah, it was. Absolutely. So, thinking about the top half of the debate then, any key points that stuck out? Summarizing, we often refer to the top half and the bottom half when we talk about British parliamentary debate. And while it is one inclusive debate, there are almost like two sort of semi-debates in there, the top half and the bottom half. So, in conclusion of the top half, any words of wisdom? Any good summaries?
No.
Okay. I think we did a good...
I definitely think it was a bottom half debate.
Right.
I thought they both laid out the fundamental arguments, both pro and con, very well. And then the question becomes, well, okay, what does the bottom half do?
Right.
To build their house upon that foundation. But I think they built a very strong foundation.
And I tell you what, in the bottom half, it took a big old turn in less than 1 minute. But what an important point to bring up.
Oh, yeah.
So that entire point about being post-Brexit and what does this look like?
For 2016, 2019,
yes.
this is 2023, Brexit happened, and all that stuff goes away. And it was just like, okay, yeah.
So important to consider, though.
Yeah.
So important to consider, especially when you think back about those points in regards to strengthening relationships with other European Union nations.
Right.
So very, very interesting. Okay, so let's turn our focus then to that bottom half. We start with I like to call it the Brexit bomb. The Brexit bomb that really changed the route of the debate, which is something that we really want to see in the bottom half. So part of the responsibility of the bottom half is to not only stand in support of the top half of the table, but also to make sure that they are setting themselves apart in a very unique way.
Right.
And that was a very lovely example of that.
Right. Once that was said, then the entire debate changed directions. And that's really what you want out of a closing government.
Yes.
Because what it does is it says, that was a great debate, now let's really get into the heart of the matter.
Right.
Boom. And it sort of not invalidates, but it sort of says something like, well, you don't live on the foundation of the house. You got to build a house, so let's get into building the house.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they brought up that great point about the post-Brexit world.
Right.
And then they also put a lot of time and effort and energy into building this case regarding power and the Russia-Ukraine struggle.
Right.
War. So what do you think about that? How do you think that argument stands?
Personally, I think the whip, the last speaker, is correct. All of the things that have happened before inform, to a certain extent, about perhaps habits or the way things that have happened. But what's important for a decision to be made today is what's happening today.
Right.
We cannot prevent any of the deaths that have occurred in the past, but we can prevent deaths in the future. And so, arguing that the U.S. and the U.K. had a unique opportunity to strengthen NATO, to really help the Ukrainian people, and at the same time to sort of serve notice to China that we're going to present a unified front between two of the major powers in the world, thus reducing the chances that China would go into Taiwan. I think that's a really strong argument.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. So how about on side opposition? When we got to the bottom half of the table, we started to pick apart this whole idea of Brexit. So we know that the United Kingdom left the EU, but there's already been talk about entertaining the idea of having them come back. Now, how long that would take, or if that vote would even pass, is obviously to be determined. But it does bring up some very interesting points, specifically dealing with the differing opinions still regarding Brexit here in the UK.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think their strongest argument or strategy is to call into question what the benefits would actually be. I mean, it's easy to say that all of these things are going to magically improve, but where is any proof that that's actually going to happen?
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be a lot offered on side government that really, they use the term solvency, which simply means will it solve the problem? And I think that's a smart strategy to take, to create doubt that all of these advantages will actually come to pass. And therefore, should we prioritize? If we don't get the advantages that they claim, let's weigh that against the potential disadvantages, right?
Right.
And I think taking that, let's take a realistic look and let's really think about what Brexit's actually going through right now in the UK. Smart.
It is.
Smart tactic.
And they also were doing some great strategic moves using their POIs.
Right.
Which are points of information.
Right.
Those are questions. So you may have seen a waving of the hand or standing up, and then the speaker entertaining that POI or that question. And I would say that closing opposition, both Lily and Tasia were asking extremely pointed questions to make sure that that point in particular was constantly coming back up. So why is this the most advantageous relationship? What actually are the benefits that come out of it?
Give us the mechanism.
Yes.
Right? You say it's going to work, but how? Show us how. Give us, you make a claim, but where's the proof? Where's the warrant that proves that claim? Easy to claim. Let's see some proof.
Sure.
And I think that's smart.
It is. It's very smart. And it's one of the really neat nuances that we love about this format of debate, because there is a way to continue to make your case relevant even after you've spoken.
Right.
So if you stand up and your POI is entertained by the speaker, you can bring the focus back to whatever your speech was about, thus keeping your arguments flowing down the table the entire time.
Absolutely.
And that is a very good thing for adjudication.
Right.
So just to help everybody at home understand this process a little bit more, we keep using a lot of jargon and lingo like adjudication, fancy word for judging the debate. And in our debate tonight, we actually have 4 adjudicators, and they are speaking to one another now. And essentially, this is like a mini debate after the debate.
Well, it's kind of like the Supreme Court. They hear a case, and then the judges, collaborate on a dissenting or a majority opinion. And so you've got these 4 judges that are basically, who did you give the 1 to, who did you give the 2 to, and they're trying to separate the arguments and persuade each other that their ordering of the teams from 1 to 4 is essentially correct.
Right.
And they'll collaborate and they'll compromise to a certain extent.
Sure. Coming to a consensus.
Right.
Sometimes that process can be extremely arduous, very long, and it can get a little tense.
If you tuned into our last show.
Yeah, we talked about everything under the sun.
Right.
But it sounds to me like they are having a great and lively discussion.
Right.
And this was a really, really fun debate.
Yeah.
So I imagine this is a difficult adjudication just because we had such solid argumentation all through the entire debate.
Yeah, and they'll come back and they'll announce their 1 through 4, and hopefully either Manny and probably Michael as well will explain to the teams, why did you get the 1, why did you get the 2. I like this format of debate because it's not up to just one person's opinion. I think that's important. And secondly, it offers immediate feedback to the debaters.
Yes.
It's not a written ballot that they don't read until hours or days later. You know, when you debate 6 or 8, 10 rounds, it's hard to remember round 2. Where this is like, okay, let's take a moment, let's
fresh
talk about
in their
it.
Mind.
Right. What was persuasive? What wasn't so persuasive? How can you improve? I really like this format for providing that immediate feedback.
It's absolutely a learning opportunity.
Right. Well, it's like teaching.
Yeah.
You know, when your students do a presentation or they do a group project or something like that, being able to talk with them and discuss with them immediately and give them feedback. I think they learn a great deal from that instead of, you know, a couple weeks later you give them a written evaluation. They've moved on, you know.
Right.
So,
and that's one of the reasons that we love this study abroad experience so much. So obviously our debaters, they debate in the States in a different format. They get a lot of great experience there. But the moment that we set foot in this country, it is just learning. So whether we are taking in historical sites, and whether we're learning about the culture, we're at the debates, we're learning more about debate. And then because of that, and because of our topics, we're learning about economics and politics and international relationships. It is so much learning packed into such a short amount of time.
And it's you know, too often I think that our students are challenged in that they hear U.S.-centric opinions about politics and those kinds of things. I think it's incredibly beneficial for them to go to Ireland, Wales, England, Scotland, and hear a different perspective. You can't just wave the flag, you know, and say, God bless the USA. You know, you have to engage on an international stage with different perspectives and still be able to clearly make your point in a persuasive way.
Right.
And of course our students, when they're prepping and we're lecturing, they have to prep for both sides.
Well, sure.
Both pro and con, because one of them's going to be pro, one of them's going to be con, and they don't know.
So you need to be well versed.
Right. So they have to really understand a great deal of information. And of course, they get the topic and they have 20 minutes to put it together. And that's really tough to do.
It is. It is.
You know, the students over here, I think they have the advantage in some ways in that they begin debating very early in life. In kindergarten, they're still pro and conning, you know, what's good points, what's bad points, how do we make this decision, do we take a nap or do we go outside and play? and they make them line up and think about that. Our students, the ones we brought, we have some that, like Lexi, she just joined the debate team last year.
Mm-hmm.
And Hayden, this is his first year to debate.
Yeah.
Now, Lily and Tasia are more experienced, but even so, they started in high school.
Right. It's just a very different approach to integrating debate into the educational curriculum.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it does not mean that our kids are not as well read.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just means that for Americans, it can be a little bit intimidating and a little bit of an uphill challenge to stand toe-to-toe with somebody who has 20 years experience as opposed to one.
Yeah. But
I
look
mean,
at them go.
I thought
doing so
Hayden
awesome.
did an awesome job.
Yeah, for sure. I thought they all
Lexi,
did. Yeah.
I know that they were both coming on the trip sort of, can I say terrified?
No, they were not terrified.
They were pretty nervous about how am I going to do and can I,
which is a normal
do
feeling
this?
to have.
Right,
and what I love is
They
they're
did so
proving
well.
to themselves
Yeah.
that they absolutely can.
The confidence between last debate, which was, 3 days ago, and this debate for opening government, that team is just
awesome.
Phenomenal to see the growth. Go back and watch the last one, then watch this one, and just watch.
That's how much growth,
in confidence.
Yeah, super fun to see.
Yeah, it's
and
just
that's
so
what this
fun.
trip is all about.
All about.
One of the other things that I absolutely love that just reiterates so much powerful and impactful learning is, let's take Brexit, for example. We can read about how Brexit is impacting the individuals here. We can read about it. We think we have an idea of what that looks like. But when you come here
and talk
and
to
when you
people.
engage in conversation
Right.
with people about how they are feeling the direct impacts of such a huge change, it really puts things into perspective.
It drives it home.
Yes.
It makes it real.
Talk about just a very cultural eye-opening experience.
Yeah.
And it really broadens our students' perspectives on so many levels. And I think that is so important for them.
Yeah. And I don't want to, because I think they may be somewhat close to being able to dance. I don't want to go off the air, so to speak, turn the attention away from us just chatting without saying a really big shout out to our DMP crew.
Yes.
That's with us.
They are amazing.
Are absolutely amazing. Shannon Johnson and Cass and
Emily.
This entire mini TV station is set up and broadcast in like a half hour.
Oh my goodness.
And
it's so
all the
it's
set,
phenomenal.
all the electronics.
We're talking about learning here. This is hands-on learning.
It's like, oh, you think you want to be a remote reporter or a remote television? Let's go do it.
Let's work on it.
Let's do it. And it's not like down the street. We're going to cover the big debate down at Old Drum.
Right.
It's like, this is international.
Yeah.
It's
pretty amazing.
And you folks are able to watch this because they're able to broadcast it. And so
super awesome.
Tremendous educational opportunity.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because it's not a studio. They have to figure out how we're going to make the sound work.
Troubleshooting the entire time.
The electricity is different. So they have all these chargers and converters that they have to plug into, and
it's pretty amazing to see.
If I tried to do this, there would be no lights on in Cardiff because I would blow the entire power grid.
Probably so.
People would, what happened? Guy plugged in, So
no, they are truly remarkable.
It's because the DMP program within our department is so incredibly strong.
Yes. Absolutely.
Absolutely great program. There's theory, which is important, but the actual hands-on
Practice.
Our freshmen and our sophomores are handling equipment and learning to actually do this. And I think that makes us a little bit unique over some other production programs in the state and other areas.
Mm-hmm.
So
fun that we get to bring them along.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah.
There's one other group that deserves a huge shout out.
Me?
Well, yes, you do a tremendous job to organize this trip. I just want to say though that our hosts here at Cardiff University have been so phenomenal. Just the most lovely people ever. Everyone is so kind. You saw their debaters, phenomenal debaters. Michael, their chief convener, had this entire evening organized down to a T, did such a wonderful job making sure that we had a really lively crowd here. Everything was set up. Just really, truly remarkable people. We love coming to Cardiff, but I tell you, I think even after this trip, we love it even more.
And you notice that in a lot of debates, the teams have no interaction. And the top half of the debate, after they spoke, would come back and talk to the other team and laugh. And they were having a great time.
That's what we love to see.
Even though they're debating against one another, they're having a really good time.
Right. That's what we love to see.
Okay, we're getting the high sign.
Oh, okay. So
which means they will call back in the debaters, and we'll go to the announcement of the adjudication.
And we'll call that a good night. Yeah. So we will give you a moment to get yourself settled. I'm sure you're just waiting anxiously with bated breath.
Do you want to give an idea of what you think the rankings will be?
I don't even know. I
think it's a bottom half debate, but I think it's going to be really close.
Yes, and I think you could make several different calls. So
absolutely.
I'm very curious.
I'm very curious to see how they settled it out.
So we will go ahead and turn it over to our adjudicators, and then we will pop back in for just a quick moment to conclude the evening. But for now, let's hear what they have to say.
You did, to be honest. Yeah, you did. You did move on. Yeah, okay. That's why I'm very comfortable. I'm no idea. I'm a different person. I mean, to be fair, you always talk in 1,000 miles away. That is true. My accent doesn't help. Oh.
I looked up that was so cool.
I want to be a politician.
Yeah.
Best of luck, everybody.
Yeah. Good luck, everyone. Everyone's been so well.
Yeah, good luck. I want to give a quick, again, thank you to Cardiff University for having us and for hosting us. It was a very great, fun, educational debate. The adjudication ran a little longer than we thought, but we came to a consensus overall. I'm going to give out the rankings, and then we'll give a quick justification of why. So, R1 went to closing opposition, R2 went to closing government, R3 went to opening government, and then R4 went to opening opposition. So congrats, and great debate, y'all. We ultimately came down to that this was a bottom half debate. We thought each of y'all brought up very great, unique points that allowed you to go more in depth. It was a super close between opposition and government. We just thought that opposition's articulation on how the U.S. can't really do more militarily right now in the status quo than they're already doing, and how they're stretched a little thin, and that we're not sure if the articulation 100% that EU and the UK will join back together, but there's potential benefits there. Closing government, we went with the 2 because once again we thought your articulation of Brexit and actually discussing that was very well versed. We thought that the military impacts were smart that you focused on. We just wanted more response from the closing opposition on terms of why uniquely the U.S. militarily right now will be the key to solve all these conflicts, even though the U.S. is stepping in already. We thought the top half was once again a very, very close debate. We gave opening government the 3 because we thought you set up the debate, you fulfilled your role perfectly, you framed the debate perfectly, no one had any qualms about framework or definitions. We thought that you went pretty well in depth in your 4 points of sustained matter. We thought opening opposition also did a really good job of talking about their points, but the main articulation coming out of the Deputy Prime Minister saying that while, yes, the UK and the US will kind of have like this mutually exclusive relationship and it'll be mutually beneficial, they're still separate entities. And then we think that we get good articulation and good rebuttal from the opening government. And yeah, overall great debate. Give us a lot to think about. Thank you for having us.
Well, that concludes our debate tonight from Cardiff University. So the teams from UCM came down with the 1 and the 3.
Right.
And Michael, the lovely convener here at the University of Cardiff, has invited our team and their team to get together for a little social, which is just, again, so kind and represents the Welsh culture so perfectly. So from that, we will sign off. Thank you so much for tuning in. Oh, the next, good. Cass was just telling me to remind you all of our next broadcast. So, Jack, when is our next debate?
Next debate is Wednesday, the 2nd of March,
so we
from
have a few
Imperial
days in London.
In London.
Again, a lovely group of individuals,
Lovely group, yeah.
very intelligent, always a super fun and lively debate.
Yeah, just
so